I want to start with the lawsuit that is in Olmsted County that your group filed. It is about who is counting the mail-in ballots. And you need to explain what the problem is here, because I'm pretty sure a lot of people don't know who's counting these mail-in ballots.
Right, and that is a good question. And we hear from hundreds of people every week, Betsy, from all over the state, from every corner of the state, and people around this, they're terrified. They're terrified of the whole idea of mailing in ballots, generally speaking. And now they're seeing applications showing up in the mailbox, sometimes 2 or 3. They're getting mail-in ballots from small towns. And people, I've never seen such insanity out there. And now that we have a much bigger subscriber list than we had 10 years ago, we're just hearing from more people all over the state. But we started looking into late last year, we started studying the statutes in regards to absentee ballot boards. And just what are they? What do they mean? Who gets assigned to them? When do they meet? How do, those kinds of things. And sure as heck, we identified kind of what we thought we were going to find, that the cities and counties, particular Olmsted, they are violating, in our view, every single aspect of the absentee ballot board statute, which is 203B.121. And any of the viewers could punch it up on their phone or their computer. It's 203B.121, and it's titled ballot boards. And it's real simple. It says the governing bodies of any county or municipality whose responsibility to accept and reject ballots must establish a ballot board. In partisan election years, which is this year, right? Yeah. 2020, that they have to, when selecting judges for the ballot board, they have to exhaust the lists that were sent by the major political parties to the Secretary of State.
Okay, so then who is counting these mail-in ballots that you're not liking?
Right. Well, again, the statute says it has to be election judges, and the statute says that those election judges have to be selected from the lists that were sent to the Secretary of State by the major political parties. So the only 2 parties that sent a list of election judges to the Secretary of State by May 1st, like the statute requires, is the Republican and Democrat Party. And so what they have to do, what the Board of Commissioners in Olmsted County has to do when they establish a ballot board, is they have to exhaust the party lists. The legislature passed a law in 2010, right after the Franken-Coleman debacle in 2008, where there was 300,000 absentee ballots cast that year. 12,000 of them were rejected. Now this year, some people expect it could be as high as 1 million or even 2 million absentee ballots. And who's doing the accepting and who's doing the rejecting? So we went and looked at the Olmsted Board of Commissioners site, and we printed out, this was just passed in the last 2 weeks. This was passed by the Olmsted Board of Commissioners. This is a whole list of people on the absentee ballot board, and they're all staff of the county offices. Every single person.
So, but who's to say that they're not election judges, and what's the problem with that list of people?
Well, the legislature specifically determined in 2013, initially they said that staff could be included once the party lists were exhausted. But in 2013, the legislature crossed out staff. They didn't want to allow staff. They wanted to make sure it was only a deputy county auditor that's included in addition to the election judges. So a deputy county auditor can serve on the ballot board along with the election judges from the different parties. But once they're hired by the county, they are not impartial anymore, right? They have an employer and they have to do what the employer says. So that's a pretty...
but are you saying that there's a partisan divide here, and that these county employees would not necessarily be fair or impartial? That's a pretty big accusation, Andy.
No, what I'm saying is this: the legislature determined that the staff cannot be on the ballot board, period. That's what our lawsuit's about. And if you look at the history of the statute in 2013, the legislature crossed out staff. They didn't want, And by the way, this passed the legislature initially in 2010, 194-2. So we're not making assertions, but the legislature determined in 2010 that there had to be party balance, that the Republican Party sends an election judge and the Democratic Party sends an election judge to serve and examine every single absentee ballot. So if it's up to staff, staff has to do what the boss says. So there's really no, no competing interest there, what the legislature determined. So we're not accusing them of not being, of being partisan or not being partisan, but once they're an employee of the city or the county, they can't serve on the ballot board.
My interview yesterday, who was talking about the mail-in and absentee ballots that come in. I asked him specifically about voting by mail as opposed to voting in person, and why wouldn't we want more people to vote in person? Isn't it better to do it that way? Therefore, then there would be no concerns of any kind of wrongdoing. You're saying that people are terrified about mail-in ballots. How big of an issue is this going to be?
Well, again, if you remember, I mean, in close elections, it's going to be a lot bigger of a factor, of course. But when they send out mail-in ballots to 3.2 or 3.4 million people, one of the immediate problems that comes to my mind is they send it to all the persons who are on the voter rolls as challenged, meaning challenged felony, challenged citizenship, people who have failed one of the 9 eligibility checks. And there's another lawsuit on one of the rules that Secretary Simon created that we believe he did illegally. But when someone fails a test, they get marked challenged. And when they come in on election day, they have to go through a challenge process. They get called aside, they get notified that their voter status is challenged. They get notified of why. Maybe they're under felony and they're still under parole. They haven't completed their sentence, or they're a non-citizen. And they have to overcome that challenge to the election judge. They have to, either, whether it's verbally or show some documentation, they have to overcome that. But at least the person's been notified and they overcame the challenge. The way Minnesota's mail-in ballot works, that all those people that are challenged, 36,000, and we've identified from the Secretary of State's office, there's 36,000 people that are in the SVRS right now, today, who have a challenged voter status. And so those 36,000 are going to immediately get sent a ballot. Now, how many of them are ineligible? Probably a lot of them. We don't know the exact number, but they were all people who failed one or more of the 9 eligibility checks. And so if they get a ballot, then they don't even have to overcome the challenge process. They just sign their ballot and put it in the mail, and their ballot's counted.
Do you really think that there could be an executive order, because you had mentioned this, an executive order that there would be no in-person voting in November, that we could possibly go to only mail-in ballots?
Yeah, I saw an article as recently as, I think last Thursday or Friday, I think in the Min Post, where the governor was quoted in there that he hasn't, he's kept that option on the table. So it's definitely an option that has to be, that people have to be fearful of. I mean, this is where states, the Democrats are going, Democrat governors all over the country. It's happening right in front of our eyes.
The concern with the mail-in ballots is more than just who is counting them and where they end up. Is there anything between when I put it in my mailbox with the flag up and it getting to the location? Because people would say, I've got complete trust in the post office. There's not a problem with mail-in ballots. We are in a pandemic, Andy. What is your problem with that?
Right. And I think that, I mean, you think of all the apartment buildings. I mean, we've all probably lived in an apartment building at some point in our life. I mean, and some of those are pretty wide open. I mean, and who knows where these ballots are going to end up? And they put them in people's boxes. Some people have mailboxes out on the road. But if there is mail-in ballots, and it's just like our lawsuit regarding the mask,
Yeah, talk to me about
executive
that. That
orders.
was the other issue too. What
Right,
about that do
right.
you say is unconstitutional? Because I'm thinking if people are saying it's going to make it a little bit safer, I don't see the problem.
Right, but I think what's our biggest problem is, I mean, there's a statute on the books where, and there's sheriffs and county attorneys out in Traverse County that have filed a similar lawsuit, saying there's a statute on the books that says you can't wear a mask or you can be prosecuted. And here comes an executive order saying you can be prosecuted if you don't wear a mask. And I think if you add all these little steps together, I think what they point to is that the governor has been acting much on his own, and in our view, should have been acting with the legislature. And the same with mail-in balloting. They fought about mail-in balloting for the whole entire session. That was one of the biggest issues on the table, and that got rejected. So,
Are you going to hear anything about the lawsuits that you have filed in time before, one, the primary, and before November? Some of these things get tied up in court for a long time.
well, this first one here was a temporary restraining order, and I don't know all the details, but I think it's going to move pretty quickly. I mean, there could be a hearing in a couple of days, because there's a primary election, a week from today. Mm-hmm. So there's that, and whether that is successful or not, I mean, the case will continue to push forward. And if a mail-in ballot, if the governor issues an executive order for mail-in balloting, I mean, there's going to be, like there isn't in many other states, there's going to be people that are going to want to challenge that in court, and we would try to amend the specific filing we did today to include challenging that as well.
Andy Cilek with Minnesota Voters Alliance. Keep me posted as to what happens with those lawsuits, Andy.
Thank you.